Hello and welcome to Pandemic Podcast for Educators. My name's Gawain.
I'm Karam.
And I'm Merike.
This week, once again, we're going to be talking about the government's handling of this crisis. We talked last week about rising case rates in the north of England, which are continuing unabated. The government still doesn't seem to have a proper test and track system in place. And it seems teachers, support staff, unable to get their hands on tests. It seems unclear. 1 minute we're on the priority list, 1 minute we're off the priority list. I think we're back on now, but it's still unclear as to whether all educators are on or whether this is just limited to teachers. Of course, as we all know, schools, colleges don't work without all of the staff that are part of them. So, yeah, the government's just completely messed this up, haven't they? Things are all over the place. Merike, are there any positives, any light at the end of the tunnel?
Yes. Amazingly enough, yes.
Oh, good. Go on, do tell.
So every week we try and encourage people, if there's an issue that they know of, to get in touch with their local branches of their union. And some members in Durham did just that. They were really, really concerned about the lack of childcare available with the local lockdowns in place. Because basically the government had said no to informal childcare arrangements because you couldn't go to anyone else's household, which meant grandparents couldn't look after children, which meant people couldn't go to work because they had to look after their own children. So members got in touch with their branch secretaries. Emma, I think Nick helped, penned a letter to Gavin Williamson and Matt Hancock. That was then undersigned by most of us up in the northern region, and was then sent to Gavin Williamson and Matt Hancock. And then the following day, ta-da, a U-turn happened, and informal childcare arrangements are now back on the table.
Fantastic. So a small victory there, but one that will make a real difference to people in those local lockdowns if they rely on informal childcare. And I guess one more signal that, you know, what makes a difference is organising collectively around something. And we know the government's not going to do the right thing. We know they're not even competent enough to do the right thing if they wanted to, but we can organise collectively and make things happen. So since we last met, we've seen the launch of the Covid19 app. It's finally out there, this long-awaited app that so much money's been spent on, so much time. It's just a little late, isn't it? But it's finally out there, been released in the last week. Karam, what do we know about it?
Well, it was a bit of a disaster to start with. When the app was
that's
first,
a surprise.
Yeah,
Sorry, dig on.
When the app was first released, there was a lot of talk about people downloading it and going to log their positive cases from their NHS test and finding that you can't log an NHS test into it. It only allows
NHS app.
Yeah, wow, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Yeah, so Serco and the other private tests done from the lighthouses could be logged, but you could not log any of your NHS tests. Last night at around about midnight, when I was listening to the radio, there was a statement released saying that they have now fixed that and NHS tests can now be logged. However, as it's only first thing in the morning now, we're yet to see if it does actually work the way that they said they would.
So let me get this straight. We've got an NHS COVID app produced with public money by the government in order to keep us all safe. This is what's going to protect us and make sure we can now get tests if you're lucky, or you drive a very long distance, or you wait a very long time. You get your hands on a test. You then wait. You get the test result. But originally, if the test was done in the NHS app wouldn't log it. You have to have a private test in order to get it logged. That's just absurd, isn't it? But they now tell us it's fixed. And of course, given we've got such a competent government and we know the people behind this app are really on it, doing the right thing all the time, it's bound to be working smoothly now, right?
You'd hope so.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
We'll see over the next
Just
few
a shout
days.
out to all the developers out there. I don't blame the developers. I blame the people who've instructed it to be made.
Yeah, no, fair point. People have obviously worked hard on this, but the fact is, incredible amounts of money, incredible amount of time. And when it's first launched, it doesn't do precisely what it's supposed to be able to do. Yeah, it's the government, isn't it? So if it's now working, which fingers crossed it is, and we're able to use that app, what's its applicability in education? Yeah,
Yeah,
how can we use it to keep schools safe?
so they've managed to so they dropped some brand new guidance on the day of the app. I don't understand why the guidance could have been dropped a week or so before to give
Oh,
heads.
come on, Karam. They've not given us notice for any of the other pieces of guidance. Why would
There's
this
a
be any
pattern
different?
here, isn't there? There's a pattern. Go on.
Well, seeing as it requests heads to write up policies on various parts of how the app works in schools, then it means that they've now got apps running in their schools without a policy attached to it. So it just seems to be a bad bit of sequencing on their behalf as well, leaving heads till the last minute, causing more workload when they're going to have to squeeze that in a very short period of time now.
Right. Okay. So
Overall,
we've got policies being written. We're going to have it implemented in schools. But how will it work? How will it keep us safe in schools, in colleges, in those education workplaces?
well, to begin with, there is an age limit on it. So it has a 16+ age limit, which means that automatically it's going to be the main use of it is going to be in sixth form and colleges, where it recommends that schools encourage all of their students that are above 16, and it does mention year 11s as well. When year 11s turn 16, that they should be recommended to download it as well. So it says that communication should be sent to parents, and then it will operate within sixth forms and colleges. Should be quite good in that kind of setting.
Excellent. So lots of people will be familiar with this app, will have downloaded it already. But basically, you download it, it tracks where you are, who you're in contact with, and then when you enter a positive test, it can then communicate that to anyone who you've been in contact with. And it's got a point system, hasn't it, for how long you spend in what proximity to people, which will let them know whether they need to isolate and get a test. Is that right?
Yeah, the point system's quite interesting because it's got additional triggers for close contact isolation, which isn't in the DfE guidance as well. So the DfE guidance only logs contact within 2 meters, but the app says if you spend half an hour within 4 meters of a positive case.
It logs that range between 2 and 4 meters, doesn't it? But gives it half the number of points. You have to be twice as long for that to trigger. But
only half an hour.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite useful, isn't it? Because it, in a sense, if the DfE guidance doesn't fully protect us, maybe the app will help in that because it logs that other contact. Okay,
it's
so
useful if you've got your phone.
Yeah, go on.
So in my setting, my phone will be in my desk drawer or on top of my desk, out the way of the children. And my setting, I teach nursery, and I greet the children at the door, and occasionally have to help separate the child from the parent because they're 3. So I'm in very close contact with members of the public, but I don't have my phone on me. So if one of them tested positive, it wouldn't pick it up for me, even if they had the app and I've got the app.
Right. Okay. So
because my desk is more than 4 meters away.
Yeah. So lots of teachers, lots of support staff will work in schools where the policy is you keep your phone in a locked desk drawer. You don't carry it about on your person. And so the app's not going to work in those circumstances, is it? So schools will either need to change policies. You'll have to wander around with your phone. Do you have lots of pockets? You have to wander around with your phone on you. Or it's not going to have an impact for you. And what about children under the age of 16? Because obviously we know that the government's still saying, although the evidence seems murky, that the very youngest children may not transmit at the same level. But of course, secondary school children who are aged under 16, what's the impact there? I mean, they can't use the app, can they? So.
Well, in theory, so the app says that you have to confirm when you sign up to the app that you are over 16. However, the secondary school guidance accepts that children under 16 will be using the app. It says it explicitly in the guidance. You must be prepared to accept that there will be under 16s using the app below age.
So let me get it straight, because I did this morning. I tried it out. It asked me if I was over 16 or under 16, and just to see what happened, I first of all clicked the under 16 button, and it said, "Really sorry, this app is for people aged 16 plus So I went out the app and I logged back in. And this time, being a little disappointed not to get in, I clicked that I was over 16 and it let me straight in. So what you're saying
Did it ask you for any form of age verification other than that? Date of birth or anything?
No, it didn't. And in one sense, you know, we're talking about an app that will track whether you're susceptible to COVID. I think it'd be great if, you know, people who are younger are able to download it, because we think, you know, there is evidence certainly for secondary children that they may well be transmitting it, but also there seems to be, the evidence seems unclear on primary children, and we need to be aware of that. So I'm not worried about the app so much itself, but we've got DFE guidance that says, in spite of something having an age verification process where you have to state you're a certain age, it's saying we have to acknowledge that children will be logging into it anyway. So does this mean we're now saying the same about online content? You know, if you go onto social media, Facebook accounts or whatever, you have to say that you're 13 years old. Are we now accepting that younger children will be accessing all of this social media? There's nothing we can do about it. Or are we saying that, you know, I mean, if the government is saying essentially that 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds can go into that app and lie about their age in the age verification in order to use it, are they also saying they should be lying about their age when they download games that are rated 18 or films that are rated 18? I don't know. To me, that seems pretty concerning that the government seems to be accepting, if not encouraging, people to lie about their age online.
I'm sure it's something we'll be expected to pick up via e-safety lessons, isn't it, about content that people are.
And so people are downloading the app to keep themselves safe, and then we're going to have to make referrals, child protection referrals, because they're accessing inappropriate content. Karam.
But I had a meeting with one of the lead prosecutors for CEOPS a few years ago, and he was talking about we're talking about games and things like that, but the bigger concern was Tinder. The fact that you can have people there is no proper age verification in it. Apparently, I don't know. I've never had any use of it, but he was saying that there already is an under 18 section of Tinder. Tinder actually has a 14+ age category on it.
Gosh, right. So essentially, although this is about the COVID app, this is once again accepting that young people will lie about their age online rather than seeking some level of protection. And I don't know why it needs to be rated 16+. I mean, maybe there's some reason in there, but maybe it's to do with holding data, but surely people's safety is the most important thing here. If I was running a secondary school, and I don't, I'm a primary school teacher, but I'd feel much safer if my students had the app, had it working, but had it legally because they were allowed it, not had to lie about their age to get it.
Issue there though.
Yeah.
Not all students have got access to a smartphone. So whilst it would be wonderful in an ideal world for everybody to have access to such things, in reality, poverty is a huge issue. There's been even more articles coming out this week about how poverty in areas like Middlesbrough have increased exponentially as a result of the COVID pandemic. So to then expect people to all download this app when they may not be able to afford to put food on the table, let alone buy a phone, is a huge issue.
Yeah.
And you can't exactly expect schools to provide smartphones for people when they don't even have enough of other equipment.
Well, totally. And so once again, we're coming up against this digital divide, which has played such a role in this crisis, hasn't it? The government originally had plans to try and address that. They promised laptops to be sent out to schools, to local authorities, to colleges, but in most areas they don't seem to have arrived. Yeah, another government promise that's been broken. I mean, I can see why you'd rely on an app and why you'd rely on that technology, because it makes sense, but we do have to acknowledge that lots of students, lots of staff won't necessarily have a smartphone or won't necessarily have access to that if they can't afford it. Yeah, so another issue there. But nevertheless, we now have an app, and hopefully an app which, as of this morning, you're able to log your test results on, and that should help us protect. So presumably, you know, our message to all our listeners is: do download the app, do get it set up, do use it, and have the conversations with your schools. Work out what you're going to do. Have the conversations with your colleges, with your colleagues. Work out what you're going to do about carrying your phone on you, about making sure that it can log, about making adjustments in policies if necessary to make sure that that app can work, because ultimately this is what we need, isn't it? The test and track system up and running. And we're going to need to keep pushing for testing because, of course, NHS staff are being regularly tested. Staff in care homes, I think, now are being regularly tested. And of course, what we really need in schools isn't this, well, wait and see if you've got symptoms or you get a ping on the track and trace and go and get a test. We actually need regular testing, don't we? So we pick up on asymptomatic cases within schools, and we pick up on symptomatic cases far earlier to protect educators. Yeah?
Definitely.
Brilliant. So piling that weight behind, and I know there's quite a lot of campaigning going on now about getting testing for all staff working in education. So again, one, to get in touch with your colleagues, your rep at your workplace, to get in touch with your local branch, find out what activities are they arranging to campaign over testing and to keep us all safe. If you are in the north, check out Campaign for Safer Schools. Right, of course, the Campaign for Safer Schools, which has been launched in, I think, in the northeast, hasn't it? And it's taken off with quite a bit of success, and hopefully there'll be an expansion of that into other areas as people push for that regular testing, etc., to make sure that our staff are safe. Maybe that's something we'll revisit in a future episode. Maybe speak to some people involved in that campaign. So other guidance we've had since last week, I believe we've had remote learning guidance out. Karam, you've been reading the remote learning guidance, haven't you? What does it tell us about remote learning?
So most of the changes to remote learning aren't actually about the content of remote learning. They're actually focused around laptops and internet, as we were saying before. The mythical laptops.
Yeah, the laptops we've never seen, right?
Yeah, so apparently the laptop scheme finished at the end of June. It says it in the remote learning guidance. It was for May and June only. And they haven't explained if the schools that were promised laptops will actually be receiving them now.
I was going to say, sorry to interrupt, May and June only, and yet there were schools that have been waiting on these laptops that just never arrived. And we're now being told they stopped being sent out back in June. It's absurd.
Yeah, apparently so. I never got that message.
What are schools supposed to do then? They don't have access to this. They've got students who need it for home learning. Whether we're seeing schools close down where there are large numbers of cases. All the students be on remote learning there. We know more vulnerable students are already on remote learning. So what are schools supposed to do? Is there any advice on what they can do if they haven't got laptops, textbooks, whatever equipment they need?
Oh yeah, so they said that you can basically use the catch-up funding to plug the gaps in their broken promises.
Oh, so essentially our education system is a sinking ship, and they're using rolled up £20 notes to plug the cracks. Really?
Pretty much.
This is just absurd. So we've got a catch-up fund that is supposed to enable students to make up learning lost due to COVID. Now, I mean, put aside all of the issues with that entire concept. You know, you've got this bucket that's being filled, and COVID comes along and we haven't been filling the bucket. So quick, let's get loads of one-to-one tutors and stuff them full of more knowledge. Put aside all of that for a moment and the educational issues there. But you've got money, which I know lots of schools would use responsibly on the wider curriculum, on personal, social education, etc. But you've got this money for students to make up for lost learning, and the government's now saying they've widened the use of that so that you can use it to basically fill in when they promised you laptops and IT equipment that they didn't send, and you're now supposed to use it. So what money is going to fill in for the students to enable students, support students to deal with the impact of COVID on their education? We're just leaving that, are we now, because we're spending all the money on laptops that we should have been sent back in May and June, but they never arrived?
It'll be lovely to have laptops and things and just no staff, because we're still in a funding crisis and there's still redundancies going on. So...
And that's the backdrop to all of this, isn't it? The backdrop to all of this is school budgets have been massively cut over the last 10 years. We've actually got, and you're right, we've actually got redundancy processes going on in schools, in colleges at the moment, when we are desperately trying to reduce class sizes to keep students, staff, families, communities safe. It's frankly ridiculous, and unfortunately it all seems to come back to money. the money the government's offering for this, that or the other, or isn't offering in most cases, the money that doesn't appear, the money that's been taken from our schools. Fundamentally, we need proper investment in schools, don't we? Invest now. So forget redundancies, to increase numbers of staff, to increase the space, to be able to reduce class sizes, because the only way education will continue and schools, colleges won't be shut down is actually if we can reduce the social mixing and implement proper social distancing. That means investment, doesn't it? Invest now for the kids.
Absolutely, particularly when you take into account how much money we're having to spend on PPE and extra cleaning resources. I was chatting to a head teacher this week of a school in our area who said their school are now wearing face masks for students in communal areas, but they're going through like 30 to 40 masks a week because the students are forgetting them or they're getting lost. He said it's costing them an absolute fortune when you combine that with all the additional hand sanitizers and lidded bins, etc., etc., etc. And that's coming out of an already overstretched budget. It's just not right.
And there seems to be no recognition whatsoever of all these additional costs that schools are facing. I mean, to be honest, the Catch-Up Fund that's now supposed to be spent on supporting students with their learning, on buying additional laptops that never arrived. In reality, much of it's going to be spent on hand sanitizer and disposable masks, etc., isn't it? Because the schools simply don't have the budget for these things. Now, I know that the union has been campaigning hard on funding for a number of years now. I know that we've won some successes in the past, although they don't make up for the amounts that are missing from our schools. But now surely is the time to really step up that campaign over funding, because we need let alone educational outcomes, which are massively important, and social outcomes, which are equally massively important. If we don't have investment in our schools and colleges, we're not going to keep our staff, our students, their families or their communities safe.
And that ship will sink.
Yeah.
And I'm already hearing of schools which have been teaching classes of 60 in halls because of lack of teaching staff.
I cannot think of a more dangerous thing during a COVID crisis than putting together classes of 60. I mean, you're basically doing the opposite of social distancing, the opposite. And I'm not blaming the schools. The schools that are doing it, presumably doing it because they have to. But why do they have to? Why hasn't the government dealt with this crisis?
There's an article out today in one of the papers by Vic Goddard, who was the head in Educating Essex, and he's talking about planning for class size of 60 and all the other heads that he knows who are doing the same thing. And he's a good guy. Gosh,
that is ridiculous. And to be honest, planning for class size of 60, or indeed just having to close because it's not safe, these are all the results of the government's failure to do anything about it. So now, I mean, I guess it's down to us, it's down to the union, it's down to us to collectivise, to make sure our schools are safe at a workplace level, to organise at a branch level, to make sure that safety measures are put in place across areas with rising case rates, but also to campaign at a national level. We need investment now, we need testing now. That needs to be the message. Any final messages from either of you?
Speak to other people in your local area. Speak to parents, speak to the local authority if you've got contacts there, speak to local councillors, speak to head teachers. Everybody needs to be singing off the same hymn sheet and putting across the same message, so that it's not just one little group of people who are saying that schools need funding. It's a community issue, so bring your community together.
Excellent. Karam, any final words?
I'm on organising. I've got a meeting on Wednesday with the governors and the head where we'll be looking at our policy around the NHS app to get our sixth formers all signed up to it and our staff, and to also consider the recommendations around the behaviour policy in case any of the under 16s decide to start logging themselves as having COVID so they can be isolated when they don't have it, which is another issue the guidance has raised.
Of course, of course. So the message there, get your policies in place, make sure the app is going to work properly in your setting, but crucially, get organised, get campaigning, testing, and invest now in our schools.
Probably the only time I will ever be advocating the testing and over-testing of children.
I'm going to remind you of this in years to come, Merike, the time when you campaigned for testing. But, you know, let's be clear. At the end of the day, with all of this nonsense around Key Stage 2, Key Stage 1 SATs going ahead in 2021 and so on, which is clearly absurd, they shouldn't be. The only kind of government testing we want in our schools and our colleges at the moment is testing to keep us safe from this virus. That's the testing we need. We need investment now, and that's what we've got to be campaigning on. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to all our listeners. Please do subscribe using the button below, and we'll be back with another pandemic podcast for educators next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.